All this is Dr. Mobeen Sayed from Drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. Today we're going to continuing to talk about long haulers, and the discussion is going to be about the mast cells. There is a conjecture, there is a hypothesis by Dr. Afrin where he said that it is possible that the severe cases of COVID and the long hauling state of COVID may be because of the mast cells. So we will actually go through his study today and tomorrow. Today we'll set up the foundations for what are the mast cells, how do they function, and why are we so concerned about them in case of COVID. And tomorrow we will look at the study, the conjecture. It's not really a study, it's a hypothesis. We'll look at the hypothesis itself to see what is Dr. Afrin and his colleagues saying about the mast cell activation syndrome. In general, let me spill the beans now. There are two things that I want to make sure that you take away. So these I'm going to give right now. Number one is his hypothesis is that it is possible that there are people who have mast cell activation syndrome that is pre-existing in them. That means they are patients of MCAS before COVID. And then when the COVID occurs, when the SARS-CoV-2 arrives in their body, then the SARS-CoV-2 triggers the mast cell activation syndrome and amplifies it, which then seems like an issue with COVID, but actually it is an issue of the MCAS triggered by COVID. So then what is the solution? So that is the second part I want us to take away. The second part is that he suggests that we should all, meaning all human beings, we should all take mast cell stabilizers. So those drugs that can help, number one, prevent the mast cell from degranulation, and those that can counter the degranulation of the mast cell. What is degranulation? Why does that happen? We'll talk about that in the detailed part of the discussion today, but this is the basic takeaway. So with this takeaway, let us start our discussion. And then I think this discussion is going to go on for 3 days. Today, we'll talk about what is the management. So what is the actual need? Second, we'll talk about how the mast cells function and why are we concerned. Tomorrow, we'll look at that study. Day after tomorrow, we'll look at other studies as well, and other papers as well that support this process. So let's start. And if you just wanted to kind of understand what needs to be done, then stick around for another maybe a minute or two, and I'll show you what drugs do they prescribe or suggest. So this is Drbeen.com. This, as much as you like or you don't like the Wikipedia, this is a good article on mast cells. Mast cells, in the discussion, we'll talk about damage-associated molecular patterns. So that is this. What are the granulocyte? Mast cell is actually a type of granulocyte. So I have that over here. Then, of course, if we have granulocyte, the cells that have granules in them or little sandy appearance, then there are cells that look smooth under the microscope. These are called agranulocytes. So what are those? That is here. Then these are a few studies here. COVID-19 hyperinflammation and post-COVID-19 illness may be rooted in mast cell activation syndrome. So if you see here, this is Dr. Lawrence B. Afrin and his colleagues, and this is the primary discussion for which we will build up today. We'll do the discussion tomorrow, and then day after we'll do further strengthening of it. At the same time, let me actually tell you this, that on Thursday, day after, we will have Dr. Pierre Corey with us as well. So my day after will be the day after his discussion. So Dr. Corey is a celebrity. He has done so much work for ivermectin. Today he decided what his name will be. Remember that we have Dr. Paul Merrick, who has decided that his name is soybean. Dr. Corey has decided that his name will be Poppy Bean. He says that I'm called Poppy at home by my family. So because of that, I would like to be a Poppy Bean. So he's going to be a Poppy Bean. He'll be here on Thursday. So after Thursday, we'll continue our long hauling discussion as well. So here, this is the basic paper. I have that paper open here in here as well. And you may be able to tell that I actually went line by line and looked at every single word and mechanism that they have described to make sure that we can make sense of what they're talking about. So today and tomorrow. Then this is another letter, and the links for every one of these things are in the description. This letter here is by, if you see here, this is by, I forgot. Anyways, this is by a doctor as well, and he's talking about, hey, we should encourage people to take mast cell stabilizers. Then this is the potential association of mast cells with the coronavirus disease. This is another article. And then here is one more article about COVID-19 mast cell cytokine storm, psychological stress, and neuroinflammatory outcomes. One important thing to take away is that mast cell activation may actually cause neurological symptoms as well, which are seen in severe and long hauling patients. So let's start. There is Life Ella 67 who says, I'll be jumping bean. Fine. Jumping bean has been taken by many folks. Okay, so let's start our discussion. So here is the bigger picture of a mast cell. And don't worry if it seems busy. Let's just look at it part by part. First of all, mast cells are called granulocytes. Granules mean small dots. When these cells are seen under a microscope, actually, you know what, let me back up. Let me first, those folks who want to just understand what needs to be done. So if you are allergic, if you have allergies, or if you have a history of MCAS, or if you have a history of fatigue, myalgias, brain fog, depression, then tiredness, malaise, and doctors have said that you may have MCAS, you may not have MCAS, but you have that chronically, there may be a chance that you have MCAS. And if that is the case, here are the things that are to be tried. So I want to give you this first. So if you wanted to stop watching, you can, and then we will continue talking about the mechanisms. So check this out. Ketotifen is one, famotidine, and we have seen in our own discussions, we have seen this famotidine in the past as well, that it actually helps. So not only it helps because it counters the histamine, it actually is useful as well because it actually is protective if the mast cells are going angry in our system. So that is good. Cromolyn is over the counter, so that can be used. Vitamin D is a great mast cell stabilizer. Vitamin D. So should I say it again? Vitamin D is a great mast cell stabilizer. Quercetin, we have talked about quercetin again with zinc. So imagine if you're taking quercetin and zinc, you already have some mast cell stabilization as well. Luteolin, vitamin C. So I have actually marked some of these things here because if we are cool beans, we may be taking some of these. For example, famotidine, vitamin D, quercetin and zinc, and vitamin C. So if you are taking them, there is a chance that you have your mast cells stabilized. But these are the overall drugs that various papers have talked about to say patients should take these. And even if you are not a patient of MCAS, you should take these because you may not know that you have it and it would help. Okay, so now the basic discussions outcome is done. Now we're going to go in detail about what is a mast cell, how does it function, why does it cause us the problems that we are discussing. So let's start. Look, a mast cell is a granulocyte. Granulocytes are cells, for example, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and mast cells. They, when we look at them under the microscope, they seem to have little dots in them. They seem to have granules in them. Most of these are part of the innate arm. Mast cells are part of the innate arm as well. You might know mast cell from allergic reactions. Even now, the allergic reactions to vaccines are actually played by the mast cell. Then allergic reaction to normal anaphylaxis, for example, with the poison ivy or poison oak, that is also mast cell. Mast cells are also involved in asthma as well. I am I'm not a very happy guy with the mast cells because they just do so many goofy things in our body. Although they're trying to protect us, especially against worms, but in that process they can hurt us. These cells can hurt us to the point of killing us. Anaphylaxis can kill a person. So these cells can actually kill us. That is why I gave them eyes, which are kind of goofy, because this is my revenge on them to say I'm going to make them look like goofy. Okay, continuing. Mast cells, a very important thing to keep in mind for our discussion now, is that mast cells have special affinity. They are in love with immunoglobulin E. If you see immunoglobulin anywhere, you're going to collect it. If you're a mast cell, you are looking around and you are just looking for IgE. They love IgE. So please keep that in mind, because that is the basis of their allergic and anaphylactic reactions. Then look at this part here. Mast cells have ACE2 receptors on them. That means coronavirus can enter in them and cause infection and become part of them and trigger them. They actually have TMPRSS2 as well, or protease as well. And because of that, they can actually work with coronavirus to activate it. They have tons of type of receptors. Most important are these for the immunoglobulin E. Once an immunoglobulin E is screwed onto them, it cannot be detached. It actually becomes a permanent fixture on a mast cell. This is like, nowadays when people do their shape change and they get some permanent things implanted, that is the kind of thing that mast cell does with the IgE. Now, in addition to the ACE2 receptors, they also have things that are called pattern recognition receptor. And pattern recognition receptors are able to look at the damaged cell's pattern. So imagine if you are a mast cell and you're standing and you have this little pattern recognition receptor, and somewhere in your vicinity, a cell dies. When the dead cell will be broken up, it would have damaged pieces of it, the nucleus damaged, the DNA damaged, the mitochondria broken, the other cytoplasmic pieces are broken, membranes are broken, and you may have receptors to touch them. And so these are called damaged associated molecular patterns, the damaged pieces. And you have receptors called PRR. Over here, I have made them like fin. This pattern recognition receptor can touch a damaged cell and know that there is something wrong happening. If that is the case, mast cell would immediately degranulate and try to protect that environment. Then they also have PAMPs. PAMP means, so we talked about DAMP, which has PRR receptors on, for DAMP, we have PRR receptors on mast cell, correct? Mast cells have another kind of a receptor called PAMP. That is pathogen-associated molecular pattern. That means they have special receptors on them that can recognize viruses and bacteria and other pathogens. They also have toll-like receptor type 3 on them as well. In addition to that, if you see here this tiny little snake that I made, they actually have protein, G protein receptors too. And what are G protein receptors? They are called serpentine receptors because they look like snakes. And they weave in and out of the cell membrane with 7 coils in them. That is why we call them serpentine or snake-like receptors. Again, they are receptors that can trigger the mast cell. Mast cells, some of them are just so moody that if you take a shower with cold water or hot water, just the falling of the water on your skin can make them upset and they would degranulate. Just sometimes the temperature changes can make them degranulate. Dust can make them degranulate. Hay can make them degranulate. They are just very, very touchy and sensitive cells. And they are not very stable cells. That is why we take mast cell stabilizers, so they don't keep releasing the stuff in them. So that is the basic structure of mast cell. These little dots in them, these are granules which are filled with histamine and heparin and leukotrienes and prostaglandins and many other things that are used by these cells to degranulate and cause inflammation in the local area. And remember, they can degranulate to a point to kill a person. They can cause so much of a reaction. Okay, now let's see what are the kind of things in them. These are called mediators, the chemical substances that are present in the mast cell. So most important is histamine. This is what is going to cause anaphylaxis. This is what causes asthma. This is what causes allergic reactions. So this is one major part of the mast cells, histamine. This is why when we are in an allergic reaction, we take those things that would stabilize the body, the blood pressure stabilization, plus will give antihistamine, so the histamine's effect can be stopped. So histamine, serotonin, heparin, which is an anticoagulant, proteases. In the protease means something that can break a protein. In the proteases, you might actually recognize chymase. Remember 3 chymotrypsin-like protease in the SARS-CoV-2, which is used by SARS-CoV-2 to liberate its enzymes. So mast cells have chymases and tryptases as well that can actually help the SARS-CoV-2 become active, and then that would trigger the mast cell itself as well. They have tumor necrosis factor alpha. They have interleukin-4, reactive oxygen species. They can release leukotrienes, prostaglandins, thromboxane A2 that are the major mediators of inflammation. And then they have platelet activating factors as well. They have ATP as well. And they have a tons of more mediators. There are supposed to be more than 200 type of granules in them. So I'm only talking about 5 or 6. So when they degranulate, when they become upset, they can cause really a problem. Now, think about it for a second for the allergies. Sometimes poison ivy or poison oak can just rub against our skin and we get the wheal and the rash there. Sometimes the asthmatic attack and the airway, the respiratory system gets swollen. The reason I'm talking about this is mast cells are usually present at the interfaces of the tissues, at the vascular boundaries. What does that mean? Look, the mucous membrane, my mouth and the mucous membrane there, or the skin, these are interfaces of our tissues. These are boundaries of our tissues. Inside the body, we have boundaries as well. For example, between a blood vessel and the surrounding tissue, there is a boundary. Mast cells sit at all the boundaries. They are like the gatekeepers. They sit at the boundaries. They are under the whole skin. They are under the mucous membranes. They are at the blood vessels, surrounding the blood vessels and the tissue there. Because of this, when they become active, they can cause massive damage in the whole body because they're present almost everywhere. So continuing on, what is the main thing that is a problem? Meaning when they cause lots of issues, they do. But what really happens when the histamine is released? Histamine, some of the functions of histamine, number one, on the blood vessel. Histamine activates the endothelium of the blood vessel. What does that mean? Endothelium are the blood vessel cells that make the inner surface of the blood vessel. When they are activated, these cells will contract, they will shrink. When they will shrink, that would create spaces between the cells. These spaces are usually present, but they would become even bigger now. And what will happen is the substances present inside the blood vessel would now easily escape the blood vessel and come out. That fluids and the substances that will come out of the blood vessel, they would now start accumulating in the tissue, which will cause the tissue to become swollen. And because now blood vessel has become dilated as well, it would bring more blood there, due to which the area will become hot and it will become red. So the swelling and the redness and hotness, that is one of the function of histamine. Prostaglandins and leukotrienes help with that as well. So local edema occurs, local swelling. So now imagine if that swelling is occurring in the lungs, or that swelling is occurring in the trachea, or that swelling is occurring in the airways. In normal cases, that causes asthma. In case of COVID, that can cause severe respiratory distress and even lead to death. Then, in addition to this, histamine can irritate the nerve endings. And when the nerve endings are irritated, they would cause weird nervous system outcomes as well. And why do I say weird? Why can't I say one thing? It depends which nerve is irritated. If it is a nerve for pain, then one would feel pain. If a nerve, for example, if there are some mast cells in the brain that are, let's say, in hypothalamic area and limbic area, and they degranulated there, then the person would have some psychological outcomes. So it depends what part of the brain tissue is irritated. And now for the medicos here, when we say irritation, what that really means, over here I've just put these little red things. What that really means is that the channels, the sodium channel and calcium channels, these channels open up. Because of the histamine, it causes various channels to open up. Those channels, once opened, would allow various, especially, for example, sodium to go in, or other neurotransmitters to go in. Or if this is a nerve that has some physical function, then those channels would open up because of that physiological function, for example, stretch or pressure. And that would cause the nerve to depolarize. That depolarization would then be felt as pain or irritation or pressure or whatever that nerve's function is. Then histamine also causes chemotaxis of the immune cells. So wherever histamine is released, over there, the rest of the immune cells would run to that area. And if they reach there, they are going to now start their cytokine production, and that would just create a lot of damage in that area. Ideally, this whole mechanism is supposed to be protective, but we know that in case of mast cells, the reaction that they can produce can even kill a person. We know allergic reactions very well. Nowadays, we are even talking about vaccine-related allergic reactions on a daily basis. The background of all of that, functional background, is mast cell getting triggered. Okay, so now this is somewhat about the mast cells function. Now let's look at their action with immune system, especially with immunoglobulin. And this would be in context of SARS-CoV-2. This would be in context of the, for example, vaccines as well. And this will be in context of the allergic reactions too in general. So here is what happens. If you see here, mast cells have a very high affinity for immunoglobulin E. Immunoglobulin E, you may have remembered from our previous talks, when a B cell starts making immunoglobulins, the very first immunoglobulin that it makes is IgM. It makes IgD at all times, then it will make IgM first, then it can class switch and make IgG, then it would make D, and sorry, D is already being made, G, and then E, and then A. So IgE is something that gets attached to mast cells. This is very similar to the medicos here. This is very similar to IgD that is used by B cell as a receptor. Mast cell uses IgE as a receptor for themselves. So once the IgE is attached, so imagine that, let's say SARS-CoV-2 arrived in our body. Our body created a lot of, let me go here and explain it. So imagine this, start from here. So we have a B cell. This B cell was simply sleeping. And remember, the receptor for a B cell is IgD, correct? Here is a helper T cell. And for the cool beans here, we have done this discussion many times that the antigen comes in or the pathogen comes in that is picked up by macrophage or dendritic cell. They break it up into smaller pieces and then they present it to the naive T cell, which can go T helper 2 pathway or T helper 1 pathway. If it goes T helper 2 pathway, then here we are. The T helper 2 pathway naive T cell will cause a B cell to become activated into a plasma cell. A plasma cell is a pregnant cell, correct? So it has become pregnant with immunoglobulins. It has started making IgGs and other immunoglobulins. At one time, it only makes one type, then it class switches. So here is a plasma cell, an active B cell. It is making Ig, let's say E now. It has done the class switching. These IgEs are going to go and get attached to the mast cell. See this goofy little cell sitting there? It is collecting. The IgEs are like gems for it. These are like diamonds for it. It's saying, give me all the IgEs that you have. I will attach them onto my cell, myself, and I love them. So now it is now coated with the IgE. It is primed now. It is ready now to be able to connect with those antigens that can bind with these IgEs in the future. So now what would happen? If that antigen arrives again, the second dose of a vaccine, or second dose of polyethylene glycol, or second time you touch poison ivy, or poison oak, or hay, or something which you are allergic to, the first time it doesn't do anything because it just primes the cells. The second time, now the mast cell is already primed. It is ready to touch that antigen. So now let's say the SARS-CoV-2 arrives again. When it arrives, our immune system is going to do the same thing. Pick it up, break it up into smaller pieces, make small antigens, present those antigens, and some of those antigens are now going to get connected to the mast cells. How would they connect with the mast cell? Because mast cell already has the immunoglobulins attached to it, which are for this antigen, for this pathogen. So once these two of them together, so they have to be two nearby and they have to be connected together when the activation occurs. Once that activation occurs, this mast cell degranulate. Do you see here all of those explosive degranulations? It would just become so mad and it would say, you know what? I was not expecting this. I am totally angry now. I'm going to just spit out everything I have in me. And it starts degranulating. Mast cells degranulate in two phases. This is why sometimes allergic reaction can occur immediately and then there can be a continuity of the reaction 24 to 48 hours after. Or this is why asthma sometimes occurs immediately. There's first attack of asthma and then after 24 hours there is another continuity of the shortness of breath and difficulty in breathing. Or this is what happens with the poison ivy or oak as well, that sometimes there is one attack and then a few hours later, 10, 12, 20 hours later, there's another attack. The reason for that is this. Mast cell, when they degranulate, not only they immediately throw out everything they have in their storage, they would start manufacturing more of these chemical substances. They would take about 24 hours to manufacture them. They're going to start cooking more histamine and heparin and leukotrienes and prostaglandins and serotonin. And it would take them about 20 to 24 hours to cook them. And then when they cook them, they start degranulating again. This is why we get biphasic allergic reactions sometimes, especially it happens with asthma and the poison ivy and poison oak. So here they have degranulated. Once they have degranulated, they produce acute symptoms, breathing difficulty because the whole respiratory tract is now swollen, or which can lead to death. Blood vessel problems where there is swelling, blood vessels are dilated and there is blood coming out, not blood, the fluids and substances are now coming out, they're causing swelling in various parts of the tissue, edema is occurring, blood pressure is going down because the fluids are escaping from the blood vessels. And patient can actually die because when the blood pressure is going down, the heart rate is going up to try to keep the blood pressure up and maintain that. Heart cannot maintain it, heart attack can occur. Low blood pressure can cause low blood fluid levels towards kidney, and low fluid volume and perfusion of the kidney would cause kidneys to fail. The person can actually die within minutes with this cell's behavior. I'm not a fan of this cell. This cell is not very nice to us. And then they can become chronic as well. And that is the basic discussion which we would do now tomorrow, that it is possible that in some people, and according to that paper, this paper, they say that about 17%, if you see here, 17%, you see here, prevalence of 17%. So they say about 17% of the population has mast cell activation syndrome or irregular behavior of mast cell. And they say that if you look at COVID, there is about a similar percentage of people who become severe as well. And they are conjecturing that maybe it is because COVID is triggering the mast cell, causing mast cell activation syndrome to be amplified. And that is happening in these 17% of the patients. And then when somebody becomes a long hauler, they are thinking that possibly COVID is triggering the mast cell and MCAS is continuing in these patients and is amplified. And that is what it is. We'll discuss more of this conjecture and how they connect the dots in here tomorrow. But this is how they think is happening. The end result of all of this discussion is still the same thing. And that is, we need to have mast cell stabilizers. So if you see here, for example, this doctor here is saying, please ask people to take mast cell stabilizers, for example, vitamin D, ketotifen, other antihistamines, sodium chromoglycate, quercetin, lutein, vitamin C, and other mast cell stabilizers. If you would see this paper, you would see in here as well that they would talk about various drugs that help with the mast cell stabilization. So that is the basic discussion today. What we achieved today was, what are the drugs? And I would think that if you are, you can talk with your doctor, you can talk with these data points, maybe those who may have the chronic symptoms of COVID may try famotidine or cromolyn or other mast cell stabilizers and see if that starts helping your situation. This paper is really a conjecture yet, but they say that whoever we have treated today, they say in our treatment, we always have mast cell stabilizers as part of the treatment, and nobody has ever become severe. So that is the basic discussion. I hope it made sense. So how about we stop this discussion here today, and then we can have a chit chat, or we can meet tomorrow, whichever way you like. So that way these topics would stay shorter. Did you like it? Did you like the discussion? So please, before we stop and then do a chat, please like, subscribe, and share if you like this work. And then there are a few links in the description. There is a link to buy me coffees. If you like to buy me coffee, I take lots of coffees. If you would like to become my patron for this kind of a work to continue, especially for the healthcare workers, then there is a Patreon link here as well. And then if you would just like to support this work, there is a link for that as well. So thank you very much. And if you would like, I would come back in a few minutes. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if you are not going to do anything, at least like the video. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.